Professor Calderon here. Hey, what's up everyone? Professor Calderon here. Okay, so I want to talk about lens. But before I talk about that, I thought it would be good to introduce you to some of the other gear that's used sort of in miniature in film if you're not familiar with it. Okay, and these are like, I say it, these are things that are common on a set, but some of them are just in miniature to accommodate like the iPhone. Okay, so I'm going to detach my camera here and show you the first one, and that would be this puppy right here. This is a tripod. Okay, just this part. From here on down is the tripod. It's also known as sticks, they call it. You know, they say go get some sticks. We're going to put this on sticks. Okay. This part right here is a cage, and the actual cell phone I'm shooting with will mounts inside this cage. And what this cage does, and this is why I'm telling you this, the cage allows me to mount a lens on here, right? Which is what we're going to be talking about. So this is a cage, right? A professional cage that'll fit on a professional tripod, and I can mount a lens on my phone. Boom. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Okay, so now let me put this back in here. Make sure it's centered up. There we go. Okay, so the lens will attach to the front of the camera, and the lens is simply the optics, the glass, right, that's been ground to a certain shape, right, placed certain distances from each other to produce a certain image that the camera, right, your cell phone, or let's say a Sony camera or Panasonic or a Canon, that camera body can capture that image. Long ago, it was done on a, I'm saying long ago, dating myself. When I was a kid, when I was young, cameras were done the old-fashioned way. It was a little box, and it had old-fashioned film in it, right? And you had to load or unload the film when it's done, okay? And the box had a little tiny pinhole, and that pinhole had a shutter. And the way it worked was that shutter would open, expose light to the film or the scene. The scene would capture it, and that shutter would close. Depending how bright that scene is, right, is going to determine how long that shutter opens, right? It's also going to determine how wide the shutter is, right? So other factors, but let's just think at the shutter, the length of how it's open. Okay, when the shutter's open a long time, it lets more light in. So it also does this thing where it sort of captures motion. Okay, so we talked about frames per second already, and we know the common frame per second for film is 24 frames per second, or 24p they call it, right? And in 1 second, that shutter will open 24 times in 1 second, right? And it freezes the action, and then we hit play, it plays that action back frame by frame. So because that shutter opens so quickly and closes, it'll freeze the action. Now, what we want is to mimic film. And when we shot on film, the old school film, right, it had this capturing of the motion. They called it motion blur, right? And as objects would move in the frame, it would blur. But with digital, we sort of lose that. Things become real crisp and sharp. And especially when things are bright outside, right, or in a bright environment, and that shutter only has to open and close real quick, choo-choo, to capture that image, right? Ideally, to get a nice film-like image, we want a little bit of that motion blur. So we want that shutter to stay open just a little bit longer before it closes. We still want a crisp, sharp picture, but we want a little bit of that blur, okay? How do we achieve that? With these puppies right here. This is a filter, okay? The filter, all it does is decreases evenly the amount of light entering the lens and hitting the camera body, okay? So I can place it right over here, and I'm gonna place it right over the lens, and you'll see it go dark evenly, right? It's evenly dark now. And I don't know, I can't see it because I'm not on the other side of the phone, but I'm pretty sure the aperture of the phone is trying to adjust now to the change, right? If I move it, okay? So what that does is, because it's decreased the light evenly across the whole picture plane, it's a little bit darker. So now I can manually adjust the setting in my camera for the shutter speed and tell it stay open just a tad bit more to get a nice exposure. And what that's going to do is going to give it a nice crisp picture, but it's still going to capture a little bit of that motion blur because the shutter will be open just a tad bit longer and then close, right? So it's a darker image. It's brighter outside. Usually it's done outside when there's a lot of light, right? So it's bright outside, right? The image is too crisp. The shutter is opening and closing really fast. We put a filter on it, right? It decreases the whole image evenly. Now we can decrease the shutter speed, make it open, stay open a little bit longer. I mean, there's other things we can do, but this is the main one. It'll stay open a little longer and give us a little bit of that motion blur, okay? What this also does is it affects what's called the depth of field, okay? The depth of field works like this. And right now, hopefully, this is going to focus on either on my hand or on my face. It can't focus on the two, right? One of them is in focus. Probably my hand is out of focus. And the reason why is because it is outside of the field that this camera is able to focus on. Whole image evenly. Now we can decrease the shutter speed, make it open, stay open a little bit longer. I mean, there's other things we can do, but this is the main one. It'll stay open a little longer and give us a little bit of that motion blur, okay? What this also does is it affects what's called the depth of field, okay? The depth of field works like this. And right now, hopefully, this is going to focus on either on my hand or on my face. It can't focus on the two, right? One of them is in focus. Probably my hand is out of focus. And the reason why is because it is outside of the field that this camera is able to focus on, right? There's a certain depth where it's able to focus, right? So that depth will start, then it'll have a range, right? And then eventually things are out of that range, okay? Or it focuses on what's called infinity, where it's wide open and everything is in the shot. That is, everything in the shot is in focus, okay? But I can place something close to the camera, right? And it cannot focus on those two things. You need a special lens if you want to focus on two different places at the same time. It's called a split focus lens, right? It's specially a special cut glass. It's clear, right? And this has focus on one side and then a different focus on the other side, right? That's the only way you can do that. But normally the depth of field is only where it can focus on one thing or certain things in a certain depth in the camera at a time. Everything outside of that becomes blurry. As a filmmaker, we use that, right? We use the depth of field. When objects are blurred out in the background, it flattens the image, okay? When objects are sharp and crisp, it gives it more detail, right? If it has detail, and then the detail sort of drifts away in the image as it goes farther away, that's accentuating deep space, right? But if we blur out everything through the depths of through using depth of field, right? Meaning everything in the background is out of focus because the subject is in focus, right? And that camera is set to have a shallow depth of field, right? Everything outside of that will be out of focus, flattening the image, okay? Now remember, it's all in the lens of contrast and affinity. So we want to go from a flat image to a deep image to a flat image if we want high visual intensity. If we want a lower visual intensity, we go from a flat image to another flat image to another flat image, okay? That's an affinity from shot to shot, which is a lower visual intensity, okay? The other reason why I showed you the cage and the lens now, and this is the most important one, is the lens itself, okay? There's several kinds of lenses, sorry. There are telephoto lens, which allow you to zoom into an object from far, far, far away, okay? There are what's called fish angle lenses or fisheye lenses, where it makes everything like a dome and you can see like all around you, like a 180. The one I'm talking about right now, the one they refer to in the book, the anamorphic lens. That's where the cinematic magic happens. Okay, let me put this down. Okay, this is an anamorphic lens. All right, it's real small. This particular one is made for the iPhone, actually. But anamorphic lenses for film cameras, like let's say a Sony or an Ariflex, or even a Red, they can cost tens of thousands of dollars. It's not uncommon for these lenses to cost that much money. Okay, so what an anamorphic lens is, and what it does is, it's specially ground glass precision, and they grind it in a way so that it stretches the image, right? It gathers more information from the sides. It pushes it out, okay? So now, instead of the 16 by 9 that we have right now, right? Instead of 16 by 9, it changes the aspect ratio, right? It changes the dimensions, right? The aspect ratio is nothing but the relationship of the width to the height of the picture frame. Okay, so what this does is it changes that. It makes it much, much wider. Okay, so we're back. Move the camera. So I'm in 16 by 9 right now. The phone is sitting in the cage, and I'm about to show you the difference. Now what happens is, the way the anamorphic lens works is once you place the lens on it, it's ground in a way where it captures more image on the sides, right? Oh, there's the depth of field I was talking about, right? My fingers is out the depth of field. But anyway, it captures more on the sides, right? And it squeezes it in. So the first phase of it, I'm going to show you how much it gets when I put this in, when I put this on. This is the actual, another anamorphic lens. This one is 155, 1.55, sorry, anamorphic lens. Okay, so put this on here. Boom. You'll see just how much more of the image it's captured, right? Now right now it's not what's called de-squeezed, so it looks smushed together. But the second phase of this happens in the camera now via the software, where the software in the camera will do what's called a de-squeeze. Okay, so there's the image without. You can see it's coming, let's say, right, I'm gonna put it right on the edge of that garage. I'd say a little bit of the barbecue grill, right over there on the edge. Okay, so that's it. And then notice where it changes once I get the lens on. And now that the lens is on, boom, we've gone from the garage over here all the way over to almost the full length of the yard. And from over here, it was the grill, right? Now we have the grill and the rest of the yard, almost to the end of the house, right? So it went from here, the image went from here to here. Okay, big difference. It gives your DP a lot more space to compose. Okay, it gives them a lot more dramatic compositional elements, or a lot of ways to deal with the compositional elements with a much larger canvas, you know. So this is the aspect ratio change that sort of saved film cinema in the early days. Once they developed this anamorphic lens, all the movies were shot via anamorphic lenses, right? So there you have it. Lenses, ND filters, and all that good stuff. The tripod, the cage, microphones, what else? Those are just some of the tools. But the lens is very important, the lens and the camera, because the lens can actually change how viewers perceive the movie. Changes the aspect ratio. Even with a telephoto lens, it'll bring the action closer to the camera.